Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Shamps and Quirky Property OddBods podcast, vodcast, whatever you want to call it. It's a podcast, but you can see us. So welcome. Hello, Paul. How you doing, mate? How's your week?
All good, mate. All good. I mean, how are you? You look quite trimmed, actually.
Well, my wife cut my hair with some clippers that we ordered on Amazon that eventually arrived from China on Wednesday.
Right.
My wife, it was. She was a bit too satisfied by cutting my hair. I think she was really enjoying it, and it was a bit of a worry. And I had my 3 daughters standing behind her, literally laughing and pointing the whole way through the process. So I don't know how it looks. Really, not too bad. Hopefully,
no, you look gorgeous as usual. I mean, actually, it's quite funny because I've seen some funny things online where people just shape it up. That and talking about haircuts, Russell, it's the highlight of my week because at 11 o'clock, I've got a barber coming to cut my hair in the garden. I'm so excited.
Is he bringing a lawnmower?
He's bringing a lawnmower. He's ex-Tony and Guy, believe it or not. He used to cut my hair in my old office in Mill Hill. And he's going to cut my son's hair. My son, his hair is horrendous. And I've had to blag him to get his hair cut, even though he doesn't know this barber. So I'm quite excited, just more so for my son getting his hair cut.
Well, good luck.
Who, by the way, Russell, has lived in his pyjamas for 8 weeks. He's changed 3 times. I mean, he's changed his pyjamas. It's all gone peak-tonk.
Yeah, no, my kids are the same. Wandering around in pyjamas, doing about an hour and a half's worth of schoolwork a day, and exhausted, and then coming to me half an hour later saying, "Daddy, I'm bored."
Or going to bed at 4 in the morning.
Yeah, lockdown homeschooling thing is horrendous, isn't it? My 2 of my kids, my twins who are 10, go back to school on the 1st of June, and I'm looking forward to it. They're not, but look, it's an opinion of mine that we do need to get back to normal as quickly.
Yeah, 100%. Let's get the kids back. They're driving us mad.
Let's talk about some property stuff. It's been another interesting week as ever, because obviously we're kind of in lockdown, but the property market now is kind of, I suppose, half in, half out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So shall I kick off with one of my highlights of this week? So you might have seen in, I think, most of the trades, I think it made Property Industry Eye, Estate Agent Today, Negotiator, and so on, maybe Landlord Zone, that Josh Rayner, the kind of world famous recruiter to the property industry, really, Josh, very, very prominent, has carried out his 2nd survey, which he's kind of calling, I think, the mood of the industry. So the first one was about 2 weeks ago, which took a temperature test, a snapshot of what estate agents were thinking insofar as their sentiment. Are they happy in their jobs? Are they thinking about exiting the industry altogether? Are they thinking about perhaps a different role? Having spent so much time at home over the last few weeks, do they now want to go into a role where they can spend more time at home? The whole self-employed model, whatever you want to call it, the Keller Williams, EXP, Fine and Country type approach. And the first survey was quite interesting because it basically showed that 66% of agents are discontent. They're considering something different. Wow. So Josh thought that he would do it again 2 weeks later. And I think his rationale was, look, if I do the survey and I bring to the attention of the leaders of the industry that there's a problem here, let's see how that settles and what perhaps they do about it. And then let's take the survey again, which is what he's done, which I think was quite clever. So the 2nd survey was published on Wednesday, I think, and actually still 64% of people are miffed. The amount of people, though, that want to leave the industry, which was only 6% in survey 1, has gone up to 9%. So I know it's only 9%, so we should be, we should qualify that it's a small number, really, but it has gone up by 50% in 2 weeks, from 6 to 9%, or thereabouts. So it's, I think, a very important measure the leaders of the industry, our CEOs and managing directors, should take note of. The big takeaway as well was that survey 2 was a bit more in depth. So what Josh did was to start asking the participants of the survey whether they were an independent agent or they worked at a corporate, whether they were a manager, a neg, or a valuer. And there was some interesting stuff in there. I don't know if you saw it, but basically, valuers at independents are probably the most discontent. In other words, the least.
It was something like 66% are really worried about job security, aren't they?
Yeah. And I would have thought that corporates would have come out worse because they've had a lot of calls about stability and viability for the last few months. But no, the independent owners, they should take note. And I think personally they've got to do something about it in terms of engaging with staff, remotivating them, and look, making sure that perhaps the business, is a bit more cuddly feely and a bit more,
I think
nurturing as we come out of it.
I think from my experience, obviously dealing with agents, having dealing with agents, listen, lockdown for agents effective market only opened last Wednesday. When they start getting into routine, working on new structures, actually start engaging with landlords, tenants, buyers, sellers, actually on the road, I think that will make them feel a lot better because they're getting out of the house as well. So I think a lot of that time when you're doing those surveys where obviously you're just on the phone and just online, actually when there's more interaction, I think they will feel better about their job.
Yes, we've got, as an agent, you've got more choice now than ever though. So you can not just do, in the old days it was, do I work for a corporate or an independent, or do I start on my own? Now, of course, you've got the online thing, so you can go to Purple Bricks or Yopa or wherever. And of course, now you've got what the media call hybrid, which in my view is not hybrid at all. It's simply a estate agency without branches, the likes of Keller Williams and so on. So agents have a lot more choice now, which is a good thing. And I do hope that choice means that each of those mini sectors, if you like, have to perform better in terms of their performance and the way they deal with
of course,
so on. So that actually standards rise, which is then good for everybody. It's good for the consumer, good for our reputation as an industry. So we'll see.
But I think only time will tell. So we have to say we'll keep
so what have you got to talk about, Paul?
Well, I've got. I actually did a webinar for Hamilton Fraser for Scottish landlords and letting agents in a week. So the government have said that they want to open up the Scottish housing market in the middle of June. So they're obviously behind us in time. I've spoken to a few Scottish agents. They're really disgruntled that Scotland have waited longer. And actually picking up on that, I want to talk about Airbnb and obviously that market, because that's just completely been blown to smithereens. Something like 90% down because obviously tourism. And Edinburgh especially, and I did a programme, I did some filming for ITV actually, but they did a programme about on Airbnb, and in Edinburgh especially, there's so much Airbnb, something like 29 active listings out of 100. And now Edinburgh Council are now using initiatives to try and see if they can buy back some of those properties for the private rental sector.
Well, they're buying themselves. The council are buying the properties.
So the councils want to offer 5-year deals. I mean, I think a lot of landlords across the country will go back and do direct deals with the councils to be their direct tenants for stability, obviously making sure they've got good tenants, because they want more private rental sector property. And that you'll see lots and lots of landlords now moving across from that short term because they're not getting any money.
They're getting their fingers burnt in short term, which was kind of the new thing, wasn't it, a year or two ago?
Right.
And Airbnb, look, undoubtedly, if ever there was a Marmite business, it's Airbnb. Some people love them, and some people, depending on whether you're, I don't know, a regulator or a letting agent, hate them.
That's why. Well, it's not regulated, that industry, and I've tried to do some work with some people, something like with Teresa Wallace and Christian Byfield, David Smith, to try and engage with them to try and do some work about how the private rental sector went.
You think it should be regulated?
Yeah, most definitely should be. I mean, obviously we see problems where properties have been sublet without consent, tenants putting properties on listings without the landlord's consent, loads of antisocial behaviour, breach of leases. So, we wanted them to take more responsibility, and we were having some dialogue, but this has obviously happened as well. So I just wanted to mention that. Have you got any other property stories, Russell?
Loads, Paul.
I'll give you one more because we've got loads on the agenda. Give me your best one.
My best one? Crikey. I guess a mishmash, really. We saw a whole load of data again this week. I love a bit of data. So HM Revenue and ONS produce both house price data and, really importantly, transaction data. Let me just quickly cross over the house price thing, because the ONS data came out and said that house prices are 2.1% higher than this time last year, but they dropped 0.2% month on month. But what you're going to start to see over the coming weeks and months is a whole bunch of confusion around the house price indexes, because you've got Nationwide, Halifax, Rightmove, and the ONS/HM Land Registry data, which is all based on different methodologies, so all taking different snapshots in different periods of time. So it's going to be all over the place for the next few months, and we're going to have experts like you and I and others kind of grabbing hold of little morsels of information. There'll be a positive here and a negative there, but it's going to be really confused because of that kind of the unsynchronized nature of all that data. So I'm not saying ignore it over the next few months, but take some of the data with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But the big thing for me, Paul, was transactions. So yesterday, HM Revenue because they're the kind of custodians of stamp duty,
Yeah,
they
of course.
publish every so often the amount of property transactions that are
Which is
being...
hard data. That's hard data, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's based on April. So April this year, house transactions, residential property transactions, dropped to 46,000. Now, normal is about 90,000. So actually, compared to this time last year, April 2019, property transactions in April were down about 53%. And the media are making a big deal this morning about how terrible that is, and the market's halved.
No, because we were locked down.
Well, yeah, I think it's bloody amazing, to be honest, that we did.
Yeah. I would be, Russell, I would be, and you call me a pessimist, but I'm a realist. We keep having that argument, right? But
Pessimistic.
I actually think that they're good figures, because considering where we're at and we were massive lockdowns, you know, people could have been obviously very aware about obviously completing, and they did. So I think actually that's quite bullish.
I go even further. I think it's amazingly positive that when we couldn't effectively exchange and complete on anything technically because lawyers were worried about completion dates that then would be missed. There to be 46,000 completions across the UK in a month where there was lockdown, the market was closed, and so on, is absolutely phenomenal. I just think it shows the enthusiasm for the British home buying and selling public, that even in quarantine we end up doing 50% of what we normally do.
No, I think that's good, but it still doesn't get away with the fact that we've had £100 bet, Russell. £100 bet, which I'm going to obviously win in May 2021.
Wake up, Paul. Wake up. Paul, it's time for the podcast. Wake up.
And unfortunately, you know, what will happen is the market will come down, rents will come down, the commercial market is going to be hit the hardest. I actually did a blog which has just come out yesterday called "Lockdown but not locked in," and I put that on Landlord Zone. And I think that once the government's supporting, i.e. furloughing and obviously incentives, whatever, the end of the quarter of this year and Q1 2021, you'll start seeing a true reflection, because it's the unemployment that will kick in.
Let's see. Well, look, of course, there have been unemployment numbers this week, which showed that the claimant count had increased, but that also includes people in work. It is not an unemployment number. Actually,
I've realised that.
We now have 3.9% unemployment, not 4% last month. So actually, unemployment has gone down, is the truth. But anyway,
too early to say. I've got one more story I want to just mention.
We've got some questions then, I think, for me.
Yeah, and then which we broke on Landlord Zone is that the courts are looking to restart and take the suspension off hearings and evictions on the 29th of June. Got a little bit of stick on this on Twitter from various different tenant groups and stuff. People don't realise that there's loads of landlords that have got cases stuck in the court system. And as I said, we've got 500 to 600. Pardon?
How many do you reckon are stuck in the system?
Well, we reckon something like 20 to 25,000 cases are stuck in the system. Those landlords not having any rent, but it was all pre-COVID-19. So it was nothing to do with pre-COVID-19. I had one landlord who was owed £22,000 4 days before her eviction date. The court's basically suspended. She's going to be having at least another 3 to 6 months rent arrears going on top of that. So that's being released. The courts are engaging with operators like us at Landlord Action. Obviously, when it comes to hearings, we're going to have conferences. It's going to be completely different, completely change the world in the legal system. So, we've got
you can start going out thumping on doors again soon.
Well, at a social distance, no. I mean, obviously, as you know,
with a broom. You can have a broom on the door.
A broom on the door. Obviously, I only do that obviously for the TV series, which is going to come out in a few months' time. But that was all pre-COVID-19, all filmed, of course. And quite rightly, I've said, every landlord should work with their tenants through these really tough times, especially if they've been affected by COVID-19.
Yeah. What about you'd like to do a bit of foreign correspondent work, Paul, for this podcast, don't you?
I do. Actually, it's not foreign. It's UK. So I thought, you know what? People give me a bit of stick about my height, okay? But there is a saying, Russell, small is beautiful, as you well know.
Great things come in small packages, eh?
Right, something like that, okay? But basically, the smallest house in the UK is owned by a lady called Jan Tyler, whose great-great-grandfather owned it. And fishermen used to stay there. 1 or 2 fishermen used to stay there.
How big is it?
Colwyn Quay in Wales. It was 72 inches across, 122 inches high, and 122 inches deep. It's called the Red Brick House. It's
So
in
it's
Colwyn, if
basically,
you look it up.
so it's 6 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot.
Something like that as well. Yeah.
And people live in it.
People stayed there, whatever. I get very claustrophobic. So people used to say to me, oh, would you go on the jungle? And I would actually for a good crack, to be honest, if I was ever asked, but I'm not famous enough.
I'd like to see you eating cockroaches, Paul, actually.
Oh, I'd love that. I love eating crocodile anus. It's the best thing going.
You've got some weird restaurants
yeah.
you.
But anyway, and you'd lose a bit of telly weight as well, wouldn't you? Going on there.
True. Well, I'm not that well known, but yeah. Look, I wish you.
You're very well known. You're very well known.
Best of luck with the auditions. In fact, maybe next week I'll send you some cockroaches and some locusts, and maybe you can eat them on the podcast to see if you can actually do it, and then we'll send the video into ITV.
Yeah, I'll be up for that.
Do that. Okay. I'll see if my local fishing tackle shop is open. I think we had some questions, Paul, this week, which is nice.
Yes, we have. I've got a question from you, quite blatantly, from John, who's in Lincoln, to Russell. Will house prices drop?
This is an easy one, isn't it? No. And look, we talked about our bet earlier on. I've had that bet with several other people over the last few days on social media. It's amazing, though, when I say, oh, let's do the Paul Champlina thing. Let's have a bet, 100 quid, that house prices will not be lower this time in 12 months' time, based on the nationwide index. A lot of people won't take the bet. Why is that? Talk's cheap, guys. Talk's cheap. House prices will not be lower in 12 months' time than they are today. And I'll bet pretty much anybody, really. I'll bet 100 quid anybody that's the case, as long as I'm confident that you'll pay up to a charity of my choice.
Definitely. Actually, talking about charity, just going off tangent, you know, I do this boxing event called Rumble with the Agents. I had to cancel it because of lockdown and whatever.
Well, thank God, because I think you tried to rope me into it, and I know there's.
I did try and rope you. There'll be plenty of
people like to smash me about the ring, but I don't think.
Plenty of people will pay big money for charity to see you get punched in the face, Russell. Right, and you know we could get a 10 stoner for you, but hopefully Rumble with the Agents will be on in 2021, and we could headline you. You could be the 5th fight on.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's move on. I'm sure we've got more pressing questions.
Moving on swiftly.
Yeah.
Have you got a question for me, Russell?
I have. There's 2 actually. Duncan from Leeds came into me on direct message from Twitter. Duncan, I know who you are. I found a tenant. Can I move them in myself? I don't have an agent. This is quite interesting, isn't it? So what Duncan's thinking is, I must have an agent. Well, yeah. I mean, look.
I always recommend landlords to use letting agents. Always have done, especially the last year and a half, because of what's going on. Really, with regard to legislation, obviously we've now got COVID-19, but you know, just keeping up to date with the legislation and all the aggravation and putting a price on time is really important. But loads of landlords will let themselves. They'll advertise the properties. You know, they go onto online agents such as Open Rent and Housing, and then they do it themselves. They do it themselves, landlords. So yes, they can. You can move a tenant in, okay? Obviously, because the rules changed last Wednesday. You can do viewings. Obviously, you need to make sure if the property's empty. You know, has it been cleansed? Obviously, was anyone there? Was self-isolate? All those social distancing rules. But yeah, it's business as normal for landlords.
I've got another question as well on the, you've got 2 and I've only had 1 this week. This is actually a friend of mine, Emma from Billericay, said, can you ask your landlord and tenant mate bloke, landlord and tenant mate bloke, I'm a landlord and I've got a tenant that is not paying. This kind of, I suppose, alludes to what you talked about just now. Yeah. What can I do about it?
Well, I mean, I get calls daily, and as I said, with Landlord Action, we've got 10 solicitors doing cases and paralegals. So, look, if they're not paying, what's the reason? Get engagement? You know, have they been affected by COVID-19? What's their work situation like? You know, can really the first thing to do is mediate, do some sort of prepayment plan. Been saying that all along, and we started our sister company, the Property Redress Scheme. We started a mediation business because the courts were obviously being backed up 6 to 9 months. What is coming in, which is really important, Russell, is now the government are bringing a pre-action protocol in. So you need now to try and do a pre-action plan with your tenants before issuing court proceedings, because that can affect costs going forward. So it's all about mediation going forward for the courts and for the government, because they want to stop loads of court cases going. But if the tenant can't afford to pay the rent, because obviously you're not a charity, you know, you've got a mortgage to pay, well then worst case scenario, you have to serve a notice. And the notice period now have all been changed to 3 months. much longer, and then you've got to go to court and issue court proceedings. And
clogged up as well, the court system, no doubt, isn't it? So I do feel
at the end of the year,
if there are tenants that are maliciously not paying, they can, but they won't. Some of these landlords aren't going to see eviction or the money paid for some time.
Definitely. And you know what? 85% of the time, landlords never get their money back because the tenants don't have any assets. You've got to try and track them down. So, you know, I mean, obviously you hear that, you see the horror stories on the programme. And actually, the programme is on every day on Channel 5 at 11:15 in the morning, which is just like the repeats.
Right, shall we round off?
By the way, I need to ask you one question. A guy who in PR as yourself, the saying, is there such a saying as bad news is good news? What's your view on that as a PR agent?
There's certainly a school of thought that there's no such thing as bad publicity, which is true to an extent, but at the extremes, you end up with, you remember the Gerald Ratner thing back in the 80s? Look, you can definitely, there is definitely such a thing as bad publicity. I think the adage is that 99% of the time, publicity is publicity on the basis that even if it's bad, probably people forget 6, 12, 18, 24 months down the line what the content and the kind of issue was, but they just...
So let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Someone that does PR, and you do a really good job as well. And obviously, I've been in the media for a long time doing, you know, and we work with PR companies. What's the strangest thing that you've done to try and get some PR? And it could be in your days of, you know, being at eMove, whatever. What's your strangest thing that you've done?
Look, we haven't prepared for this. You've just...
I know, but you know, that's why we do this, because people like to see it.
I'll tell you what it was. I talked to PR firms. I hired a PR firm at eMove back in 2013-14, before we took PR in-house and kind of made PR famous for eMove, really. We hired an agency that persuaded me to spend a lot of money. It was about 10 grand on a machine, a kind of... You remember in the 80s, you know... Noel Edmonds and Philip Schofield, they used to gunk. So we got someone to make a gunk machine, and we set it up at Blue Water Shopping Centre. And we got an actor in a suit that looked like an estate agent, and we allowed him to come and gunk the estate agent. And we had a photographer taking pictures. And this idiotic PR agency at the time, I mean, bear in mind this is 6 or 7 years ago, said this will be fantastic. This will go all into the nationals. The tabloids will love it. That, you know, it's gunking an estate agent. It didn't have one piece of coverage. It was a complete waste of money. And that was one of the things that inspired me to fire that big West End agent as they were and do it.
But you know what? You know what? I can relate to that, because I've gone through loads of PR companies in the past, you know, and they charge you £1,000 just to go to lunch with a journalist in the hope that you'll get some sort of article. So I think as time goes on, you know what you want, and obviously you do, because obviously you set up propaganda.
So should we finish off with Prize Property Plum?
I'm desperate to know, because you never tell me. It's always a surprise. So, I mean, I'm fearful one day you're going to put my name forward.
Could be me. I could even target myself. So look, and can I just qualify before I say who it is, because it's a person this week. It's not personal, all right? Don't get the ump. Don't get your lawyers involved. It's a bit. Have we as partners in Shamps and Quirky, have we got a little disclaimer that goes down the bottom? Please do not sue us. I think Ben, our erstwhile editor, needs to stick one on the bottom right.
Yeah, Ben, stick that in for us.
Having said that, look, what I'm about to say is based on fact. It's based on a tweet, and it's based on the Times yesterday, the glorious Times newspaper. So my award this week, Paul, for Prize
drum roll,
is our mate Henry Pryor. Right. And the reason it's you, Henry, I'm afraid, is because, look, I know you're a buying agent, and it's in your interest to talk the market down so that you can be seen to be the white knight, you know, the knight in shining armour, coming along and, you know, saving everybody from paying too much money for a house. Stating in the Times that a £1.5 million apartment in London is now worth 900 grand, literally, therefore, being a 40% drop in value in just 1 month, is ludicrous. Henry, it is silly. It's actually a bit dangerous. So my Prize Property Plum of the week is Henry Pryor for trying to talk the market down. I'm afraid, in deference to that, Henry and everybody else, I'm going to continue to be positive but logical and sensible and pragmatic in being a kind of an optimist, but not unrealistic, but insofar as telling it how it is in terms of the market not crashing around us. So yeah, Henry, congratulations.
Okay, fine.
But Paul, anything to finish off with? Lots more we could talk about, but we'll probably.
I'll tell you, there was one funny story I did pick up. It's got nothing to do with property, but it did make me laugh. And it was in the Covent Bun. It was in the Sun, of course. It was.
It might even
we
be
know that, of course, and I love Dear Deirdre, by the way. You'll get to know me. I love a bit of Dear Deirdre. My aim is to be in the photo casebook.
We're going to say, I hear that you write in every week.
Yeah, well, I do, yeah, but I want to be in the photo casebook. That's my dream. But anyway, we know the football season is more like it's like a write-off, and no one can go and see the crowds. I just got notification, being a massive Spurs fan, that I'm going to get credit for the last 5 games. Whether that's good or bad, that remains to be seen, because they're going to try and get new tickets. But in South Korea, they did something very, very ingenious. What they did was they put sex dolls sat on the seats to actually look like they're filling up the stadium. And they got fined £66,000 for doing that. It was a South Korean football team. Quite funny.
Can I just ask a question? Where on earth did they have so many sex dolls sitting in storage to do that?
Well, obviously.
And it begs the question, why did they have so many sex dolls sitting in storage?
You know what? This is a property programme.
Yeah.
Okay? We can't go into that yet. We don't know what happened in lockdown.
It's part of some really weird training regime on the part of the South Korean leagues, isn't it? Anyway,
it could be, but Google the story. It is hilarious. I just wanted to mention that.
You come up with some weird or wacky things, I've got to say. All right, mate. Look, that's been great. Look, that's a wrap. Episode done. Let's see who wants to watch. Please do comment on YouTube, on social media. Send me a tweet or two, as many people seem to like to do, particularly if you disagree with me, which is all fine. It's a democracy.
And we want questions for next week as well, don't we, Russell?
Questions, yeah. So at Paul Champlain, at Russell Quirk. Look forward to episode 3, mate. Have a good week.
And this will come out every weekend.
Every weekend, yeah. When otherwise there's a bit of an absence of property news. I know we all get our adrenaline fix Monday to Friday through Property Industry Eye, Estate Agent Today, Negotiator, and Landlord Zone. But yeah, look, this is a light-hearted look at the end of the week for your weekend delectation. Till next time.
See you later.